Thank you all for coming. I am Senator Tony Munoz, the Senate sponsor of Senate Bill 2641, which was designed to extend regulations, peer-to-peer vehicle rental companies that are currently in place for rental companies across the state. Today I'm joined by my colleagues from the House and the Senate, both chambers, including Senator Rezin, Deputy Majority Art Turner, Representative Worley, and representatives from the rental car industry, including Jim East with Hertz, Greg Scott with the American Car Rental Association, and Jeff Wilder from Enterprise. We have come together today to call on members of the General Assembly to override the governor's veto of this legislation. Opponents of the bill have repeatedly misrepresented the intention of this legislation, claiming it would stifle an emerging industry and raise taxes on individuals trying to make ends meet by renting out their cars. These arguments simply aren't true. The effort is about closing loopholes that allow peer-to-peer companies to operate largely unregulated, which puts drivers at risk and allows these companies to get out of paying their fair share of taxes. As it stands now, peer-to-peer companies are not required to have their cars inspected annually, and they don't have to pull the vehicles from rental fleets if there are outstanding recall notices. Instead, they leave it up to an individual car owners, which is incredibly troubling when you consider that 25% of all vehicles on the roads are operating with unsolved safety recalls, according to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. It doesn't make sense to allow these companies to put the customers and public at risk, particularly when there's already safety regulations on the books for car rental industry. Why should these companies not be held responsible for ensuring the safety of their vehicles when their product is doing the same? It's wrong for the governor to have vetoed this. I urge my colleagues to do the override. Thank you. Majority.
Good morning. My name is State Representative Arthur Turner. I wanted to clear up a major misconception being peddled by opponents. The claim is that this legislation will place additional taxes on owners who rent out their cars. Under this legislation, vehicle owners will not be required to pay additional or higher taxes. It will be up to peer-to-peer companies to collect the same amount of in taxes already being paid by other rental companies. Why should car-sharing companies get a special deal? Illinois charges a 5% automobile rental tax, and locals have the option to add another 1% tax on top of that. According to the data for 2016, the statewide auto rental tax yields $40 million a year, and the local taxes also bring in about $40 million a year. That's a little more than $80 million total. Opponents have claimed that the legislation came together quickly during session without input, but since adjournment, peer-to-peer companies haven't shown much willingness to negotiate this important issue. We didn't get much feedback other than the veto message from the governor's office, and due to the importance of the regulations presented here in this piece of legislation, we are moving for an override. I'd like to introduce Representative Grant Worley.
Good morning, State Representative Grant Worley, Naperville. It has been said that this piece of legislation is unfair to certain businesses and will dampen their growth here in Illinois. I am here to respectfully disagree with that. What this piece of legislation will provide is a level playing field for all business to flourish in this great state. Regulation is something that we need to keep to a minimum, but regulation is something we need here when we're talking about uninsured motorists or the recall component of this. Public safety is number one, and this bill helps address those concerns that insured motorists are on the road through these peer-to-peer rental car companies. Also, the taxes. Now, while I would be in favor of removing all taxes on this type of industry, I don't think that is what this General Assembly is going to do. So at the very least, we should make it a level playing field. When government puts its thumb on the scale and tips a business one way or the other, that is an unfair advantage, and that needs to stop, and this piece of legislation does. I also call on my colleagues to override this bill. I look forward to this getting through the Senate and thrown to us over at the House, where we can override the governor's veto. With that, I would like to introduce Senator Sue Rezin.
Thank you, Representative Worley. Good morning. This legislation is not only creates fair competition for all car rental companies, but will also push important consumer protection practices for all companies within the industry. It's immensely important that consumers receive fair contracts and upfront pricing so they can make informed decisions when choosing a car rental service. This legislation ensures customers get an upfront breakdown of costs and will not be stuck with that sticker shock at the end of the day. Next, I'd like to introduce Jim East from Hertz.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, senators and representatives, for inviting us here today. This is a special day for Hertz, particularly. 100 years ago, John Hertz started Hertz here in Illinois. So I think it's appropriate that we're back here talking about industry. Peer-to-peers like to talk about the fact that they rent their cars on the internet. So do all the rental car companies. That is not unique. What is different about the difference between peer-to-peers and the rental car industry is that we pay lots of taxes, and we like doing that. In particularly, and I'm here to speak to this specific issue, we pay over $40 million a year for concession fees to airports here in Illinois to operate at those airports. Those monies are used to pay either construction bonds so they can build new terminals or runways, or to operate the airports. We believe that it's important for us as partners with those airports to be invested in those airports. I would hope that with this legislation, peer-to-peers and anyone else that is utilizing the airport also makes that same type of contribution. I'd like to also talk about other types of infrastructure. We hire lots of people. We make big capital investments. Those are all really important to the economy of Illinois. With that, I want to introduce Jeff Wilder from Enterprise to talk a little bit more about the car rental industry. Jeff.
Good morning. I'm Jeff Wilder, General Manager of Enterprise Rent-A-Car of Chicago. No matter where someone rents a vehicle, consumers deserve a transparent pricing model, peace of mind that the car was inspected, that recalls are up to date, the car is maintained properly throughout the rental life, and the promise that someone will be there to help should something go wrong. Every vehicle rental company, no matter how they rent their vehicles or how they find their customers, should prioritize safety and transparency. This legislation will ensure a level playing field between peer-to-peer companies and the legacy rental companies, while simultaneously protecting all of our consumers here in Illinois. And I'd like to introduce Grace Scott from the American Car Rental Association.
I guess I get to clean up. My name is Greg Scott with the American Car Rental Association. We are the association that represents about 98% of the overall car rental industry across the United States. Many of the nationwide systems represented here today, Enterprise, Hertz, Avis, et cetera, are part of our association, but also so are hundreds of small mom and pop operations, including many here in Illinois, that operate anywhere from 5 to 15 to 50 different cars in their fleet. I think the key issue with this legislation and the reason to override the governor's veto is, quite frankly, safety. In 2015, ACRA supported federal legislation that says that a car rental company cannot allow a car with an open safety recall, let's call that a Takata airbag, a GM ignition switch, a Chrysler cruise control fault, to go on the road, nor can we sell it out of our fleet. Those regulations currently do not apply to the peer-to-peer companies that are the subject of this legislation. If the veto is overridden, then those companies will be required to make sure that Takata airbags, GM ignition switches are not in the cars that are being listed on these peer-to-peer platforms. And with that, I urge that the governor's veto be overridden. Thank you. And I think we're prepared to answer any questions there might be, if there are any.
Senator Munoz,
Yes.
what motivation would opponents have to change their mind and vote for this override when you already said on the floor that you pass a trailer bill to remedy some of these situations. Why would they pass this bill if you've already conceded that?
Oh, the trailer bill that we did, there was, the city of Chicago had some concerns, so we addressed their concern. Kevin Martin, the insurance industry had some concerns, and we addressed that as well. So we've been willing to work with the opponents. The entire summer, I have not heard from any of the opponents wanting to sit down and give me any amendments to the bill, so to speak. I mean, clearly the veto right and what the governor did on the 46 page, a lot of it had nothing to really do with this. So we were willing to work with the opponents, so we just want to go ahead and just do the bill as is, that was passed.
How many peer-to-peer rental cars are there in operation in Illinois?
That, we have how many peer-to-peers out there?
On platforms that are
Can you speak into the microphone, sir?
There are approximately 12,000 peer-to-peer vehicles on platforms listed for rent in Illinois, and about 200,000 nationwide.
Would any of you support just having a cutout so that if someone's just renting their one car, that the regulations wouldn't apply? Isn't that really one of the primary differences, that you have some people just renting out their one car as a peer-to-peer? They're not really in the rental car business per se. This is a part-time pickup.
I think you've asked a very good question. And in fact, many of the cars that are listed on a peer-to-peer website are actually part of a fleet of vehicles that an owner is running a business. They're running a side business. The question is, are they renting a car? Does it make any difference if they have one car on the platform or 20 cars on the platform? If that one car has an unrepaired Takata airbag, for safety purposes, shouldn't that car be pulled off the market and not rented for profit? I think that's the key. If it's that one car and that car causes somebody to be injured or killed, then that's one car too many.
So if their one car is up to safety codes, they've had all the recalls addressed, is there any other differences that this would apply as far as like taxation?
If they rent that car at a federally assisted airport in Chicago, O'Hare, any of the airports, they should be paying concession fees for that and have it.
Is that a flat fee, or would that, how is that?
It tends to be a contract with the airport that is a flat fee. A percentage of gross receipts is the way most of the Illinois airports work. 10%, 11%. It varies from airport to airport.
So if in the entire year they only had $1,000 from the airport, would they only pay $100, or would they have to be paying all their revenue on a percentage fee? So if they operated basically in the loop, but they made one trip out of the course of the year to the airport, do they have to pay that?
No, it's only the rentals that occur on the airport. Hertz might rent something in downtown Springfield, and that airport concession fee doesn't apply there. It's only if you're taking advantage of the airport rental market do you pay that type of fee. So if I had a car on a peer-to-peer site and only one of my 50 transactions in the year took place at Springfield Airport, then only 10% perhaps of that revenue would be collected by the Springfield Airport. But the others would be subject to, here in Illinois, the 5% rental tax, plus localities retain the right to do a 1% tax on top of that. So it's not just an airport fee. There are also sales taxes and local option taxes that would need to be paid.
Would the cost of going along with the regulations prohibit, wipe out the economic incentive to rent out your car?
I can't answer that question. Our viewpoint is having the peer-to-peer companies do the compliance. I realize my question was my answer. Having the peer-to-peer companies do the compliance makes a lot more sense than the individual car owners. They have the infrastructure. They know what the transactions are. They're billing the transactions. They can build in the taxes and the airport fees much more easily than an individual car owner.
How has your market share changed over the years with the onslaught of this new tech ride sharing and peer-to-peer? Have you lost significant market share there, or how has the business changed?
Not to date, no. And people ask the same question about Uber and that sort of thing. And the fact of the matter is that our revenue and our rental days have been stable. It's not been dramatically impacted to date. But this is actually a fairly new technology, new platforms, as they grow, the tax base for the state of Illinois will be reduced, and the airport budgets will be reduced, and we will have tragedies. Unfortunately, there will be tragedies that occur with cars on these platforms, and we'll hope that we stop them by passing this legislation today.
Do companies like Enterprise, Hertz, Avis, others, do they pay state sales tax on the transactions of rental?
Yes. At 5%, and then the local option, and it's much the same in every other state across the nation.
Do these other peer-to-peer people pay those taxes?
They do not.
How much would possibly be generated if they did?
I do not know the answer to that question. We've heard that there's an $80 million contribution by the by the legacy car rental companies to the state of Illinois. I don't know the percentage that the peer-to-peer companies, but there's clearly revenue being lost that could be, could be added to that $8 million.
So you can just to remind us of what the votes
Feel free to
were.
step in, anybody that would like to.
Yeah, you're good. One of the legislators can remind us of what the votes were, what the vote numbers were, both the House and Senate, so we have some idea how close it was?
Mid-70s?
In the House of Representatives, I believe we had between 74 and 78 votes. 78 exactly, 78.
And in the Senate,
I think we had about 32 in the Senate.
so that was where the shortfall is
Yes.
for an override.
How does, just generally speaking, how does veto session change in terms of how you get this override done when there's a new transition, a new governor coming in? Do you think you still have the momentum, the votes to get this override to happen now? Why not save it until the next session in the spring?
This is what we're doing, veto session, so we can do an override to the governor's veto. We do that once a year, so this is the time to do it now. Whether we get it done, then it can go to the new governor. But we want to get this done now in veto session.
Thank you.
Thank you all.